It must have come as amazing news to Eric and Lyle Menendez back in February, when California's governor dipped his toes into their case. Gavin Newsom ordered something called a comprehensive risk assessment. And that is basically the state parole board's best guess as to the danger that these brothers might pose if they ever leave prison. And this was a big step, right? Because Lyle and Eric have done pretty much everything that a parole board wants prisoners to do. And then some, actually. And if their risk assessment report is the only thing standing between them and freedom, well, you can imagine them packing up their cells tonight. But ironically, that risk report, contents of which still unknown to you and me, by the way, is the one thing that may keep them locked up a little longer, a couple of months longer anyway. And let me tell you why. Today was supposed to be resentencing day, right? This was supposed to be the day when the judge heard both the pros and the cons of letting them out and then, you know, making a decision. But the judge said, wait, I may not be able to do that, because the DA said the judge has to look at that report before making any decision. And so here we are again tonight with yet another delay in the battle to get him out of jail. And you can tell it is taking its toll. Maybe not so much on Eric and Lyle, because they're used to being locked up. Those two sat quietly on Zoom throughout the whole process today. But their lawyers, man, the lawyers are fighting mad. After the DA threw his spike in the process with the whole risk assessment thing, Judge, you got to see that before you can. Lyle and Eric's lawyer moved to recuse that DA, especially since the DA showed bloody crime scene photos in the last hearing without warning the family that they were coming, and one of those family members ended up in the hospital. Here is what Mark Garagos, the brothers' attorney, told Brian Enton tonight on Cuomo.
The victims, who also happen to be my client's family, they're both their family and they're the victims. They have been savaged and traumatized repeatedly by this new DA, and starting with last Friday when grisly crime scene photos are put up there, and they were given no warning whatsoever. Today, they filed, or last night, the DA filed a motion to continue the case without notifying any of the victims, once again, violating Marsy's law, which is a constitutional provision for victims. And so we decided today, after the latest shenanigans, that they want a continuance. That's fine. We're going to continue it just long enough to move to recuse, basically to ask the judge to throw the DA off the case and find somebody who is at least partially in compliance with the Constitution.
So tonight, Lyle and Eric eat another meal in the chow hall of the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, where the brothers have been for years. And at the same time, someone who spent years with them in that prison is here with me. Anna Ray X-rated Brown was sentenced to life for a gang-related murder, but he credits Lyle and Eric with helping him turn his life around, earn his parole, and find success as a rapper. X-rated, thanks for being on tonight. I really appreciate this chance to talk with you. You know them better than most people out there who've just seen the documentary, you know, on Netflix. How do you suppose they're taking the news of what happened today and all these delays one after the other?
They are very composed people, and in that environment, an unfortunate consequence of what they've been through the judicial system, the courts of appeals, putting in the habeas petitions and things like that. There's a lot of rejection. There's a lot of waiting, hoping, and then an eventual settling into the reality of what your experience is. So they've seen a lot. They've been through a lot of these processes, and I believe that they're handling everything with composure. I did a video chat with both of the brothers and the family earlier this evening, and they were okay. They were okay.
What'd they say? Tell me about the chat. I mean, if you're allowed to.
Well, it just seemed, it was like, more waiting, and here we go, but it was more focused on them having the opportunity to speak with the family. There were probably about 14 of us gathered in that room, maybe a little less than that. But to see Terry through the video chat. So I think we were more focused on that side of it, family, and just a little bit of joy within the waiting and more waiting. So yeah, the focus in this particular instance was just on family and the joy of seeing family.
Yeah. So Terry, if I'm not mistaken, is Jose's sister. She's the person who went to the hospital. She's in her 90s after those pictures came up in the hearing last week of Jose's body riddled with bullets. It was a very upsetting crime scene picture, and the family's upset. They didn't get warned about that. You said that she was on the video chat tonight. How is she?
The boys were able to see her. She's an amazing woman, one of the strongest women that you'd ever encounter. A fantastic spirit, and she's gaining strength, and we're proud for that. We're happy about that.
Is she out of the hospital?
I wouldn't want to speak on behalf of the family with regard to things that are too specific in details like that. I don't believe it's appropriate for me to do that.
Understand completely. And I actually want to steer the conversation towards your time that you spend with Eric and Lyle, because for a lot of us, we see it on paper. We're reading the reports. We're reading that they've done all these programs. They had started all these, these programs to help other inmates, to make a jail and a prison facility more of an environment for rehabilitation, right? And we rarely get the chance to speak with people who spent the time. So walk me through a little bit about what these two men are like from your perspective.
So interestingly enough, they always talk about, oh, Lyle, he's portrayed as this arrogant guy. And when we first met, I was a 24, 25-year-old rapper with music out. I'm hitting the Billboard charts. I'm in Playboy magazine, LA Times. And, I was the one that was a bit cocky. And we were at an institution together, and I'm wearing big chains and, Rolexes and diamonds in my ears, even though you're not supposed to have that type of stuff. And I did an interview in the day room with the music magazine, and, they had cameras and lights set up. And, of course, Lyle observed that, and a day later or so, he called me over to him, and we had a conversation where, he just told me he thought I had so much more potential than, some of the characteristics that I was exhibiting. I still was associating with known gang members. It still mattered to me what people thought of me, my perception, being flashy, refusing to do jobs on the prison facility grounds. And there was Lyle who told me that he thought I could use my influence for positive means. And I respected the fact that, his stature, he had a lot of media coverage. As in that population, there aren't a lot of us who have what you would call celebrity. You have people who are doing their time and just trying to get through their experience. That's the great majority of the population. And then you'll have somebody like myself and Lyle Menendez, and I could look at him as someone who was doing well and, doing interviews with Barbara Walters. So I just thought that his input was important for me to accept. I was at a stage in my life where I'd been thinking these things, but I didn't necessarily have the fortitude at the time to start applying what I believed was necessary for my life. And Lyle was the one who pushed me towards starting to educate myself and go to self-help groups and things like that. And so, I started doing so, anger management courses, meetings with psychologists, AA, NA. And then I transferred to a facility where Eric was. And Lyle wrote him a letter and told him I was on my way. And he said, treat him like I arrived. I love him, you love him. And so Eric's like, all right, I got you. And Eric kind of took it from there. I did NA groups with him, AA groups, 12-step groups, meditation groups, participated in the life care and hospice program that he actually founded. And yeah, they just encouraged me to do everything that I could to improve myself. Once Senate Bill 260 came into law in 2012, authored by Senator Lonnie Hancock, and signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown in 2013, the brothers were just so excited for the fact that I qualified as a youthful offender and had an opportunity to, as someone who faced the death penalty as a 17-year-old, ultimately was transferred over to adult court, defeated the death penalty aspect, and then ultimately was convicted and sentenced to 31 years to life in state prison. I became eligible for parole as a youthful offender in 2013 when Senate Bill 260 was signed into law.
And this is what's so incredible, is that this is the law that they are now qualifying under for a resentencing, is the youthful offender law. So they helped you to basically petition, get out of prison on parole and change your life. And now look at you. I mean, a success story. One of the things I never hear about, X-rated, or rarely hear about, is cohesion between the races in prison. And I did not know that you and the brothers actually got together and worked towards sort of mediation between different races in prison. It's just sort of a story you don't hear very often. Tell me a little bit about that and how you ended up being like the little brother almost of these guys.
Yeah, I believe that what we experienced was hopelessness in that environment. There was pervasive hopelessness and learned helplessness in that environment. And, you know, hurt people. So we had a proliferation. The population just exploded as a result of the 3 strikes law, where, you know, people who weren't necessarily hardened criminals, but maybe, you know, people who had drug problems, they got 3 strikes for, you know, they had a fist fight before, they stole a slice of pizza, now they have 25 to life. Population explodes. We have this crisis of overcrowding, and there was just pervasive hopelessness. And then when the laws started to change, California's fight to repeal the 3 strikes law, and then Senate Bill 260 going into effect and lifers actually having a legitimate opportunity to go home, which partially is a travesty of justice because 260 was authored largely as a result of the SCOTUS ruling in Miller versus Alabama, which was a debate about capital punishment for juveniles focused on the death penalty and LWOP, which would actually have applied to Lyle and Eric, but instead of addressing LWOPs, California chose to focus on people with indeterminate sentences, such as myself. So this law actually came into effect as a result of them examining things that would have applied to Lyle and Eric, but they chose to go in a different direction in order to, I think California wanted to have a lighter rollout and not have.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to cut you off. I have to leave it there, but I want to have you back on the program because clearly today ended without, you know, the result that we wanted, which was some resolution. And when there is resolution, I'd love to have you back because clearly this is near and dear and personal to you. So I hope you'll come back on the program again.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
So for the first time, I should say, in almost 2 years, the family of Rachel Morin can turn their thoughts away from the law and the courts and the justice to try to find just some peace. Now, if you were with us last night, you know the 23-year-old undocumented immigrant who is charged with Rachel's sadistic murder on a jogging trail in Maryland was convicted in less than an hour after a 9-day trial. A jury found Victor Martinez Hernandez guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, first-degree rape, and kidnapping, and he will almost certainly be sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. Here's the prosecutor after yesterday's verdict.
It is my sincere hope that today's verdict brings some peace and closure to the entire Morin family. While no verdict or sentence can ever bring Rachel back, I am proud of the work that was done to ensure that justice was served and that Victor Martinez Hernandez will never again be a threat to another woman in his lifetime.
Now, this was a slam dunk case. I mean, the evidence was against him. And this suspect was ID'd from DNA at the murder scene in Maryland and from an assault in Los Angeles months earlier. Remember this video? But it still took almost a year to track him to a bar stool in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And through it all, Rachel's family grieved and hoped and waited, and they finally got a sense of justice. And now it is my pleasure to welcome onto the show Patty Morin. This is Rachel's mother. Patty, thank you so much for taking the time. This journey over the last several years, it's unimaginable. And after what happened this week, I just wanted to ask, how are you holding up? How are you doing right now?
It's kind of like a weird place to be, because we're happy. And like, I don't even know if happy is the word, but I don't know what other word to use. We're happy that there justice has been found for my daughter, that the evidence presented was so irrefutable that we truly believe that he was the murderer, and to see the process and to understand the crime, and then to see the juror, pay attention to the details of the case as it's presented, and to come back with a verdict it felt like finally it was over. Like, for the last 19 months, at first we didn't believe that she died, and then we were almost losing hope that they wouldn't be able to find anybody because it just seemed so impossible. But all the detectives and the law enforcement agencies working behind the scenes and then not telling the family all the details, which made us kind of frustrated and angry, because we didn't know, do they really know what they're doing or not? Because we've never been this way before. But to see it all just accumulate, I'm so emotional right now, I can't even speak.
That's okay.
Just come together and like such a perfect defense or prosecution, where every detail was like layer upon layer upon layer of irrefutable. It just made me so grateful for all of the men and women that worked on this case. They took Rachel as if she was their family member, and they worked so hard for our family to find justice for Rachel and to bring this to a closure for us. So I'm happy and I'm sad.
No, look, you know, Patty, this is, as you said, your first introduction to the criminal system, the criminal justice system, and hopefully this is the last you ever experience it. And I'll say I speak to a lot of victims' family members, and everything you described, completely normal. They talk about this relief, this weight that they had to carry from when the crime was committed through the investigation, the arrest. It's completely normal. You know, one of the beautiful things about Rachel was she had this big family and she had these children. How are they doing? Do the younger ones understand what's going on right now?
I don't think they completely understand just because of their age. I know that they've been told that mom has gone to heaven and that mom's not coming back. But I think as they grow and they revisit this and get more details, you know, as they're old enough to understand, I think that they're going to be grieving over the next few years as they process this. But I do have to say, during the trial, 2 of her daughters had to give testimony, and it was so heartbreaking. They were so brave, but it was so heartbreaking. Her 14-year-old daughter, Violet, was the last one to actually speak with her and communicate, and she broke down on the witness stand trying to keep herself composed to answer questions. And then when she's leaving the courtroom, you just hear her just break out into these heart-wrenching sobs. It was so hard because we were asked not to show emotion in the courtroom so that our emotions wouldn't persuade the jury in any way, because we really wanted to have a fair and just trial so that the verdict would just be a solid verdict. But just to hear her heart-wrenching sobs was so hard. So they still have a long way to go to heal.
That testimony was incredibly difficult because not only are they talking about the loss of their mother, they're talking about the last time they spoke to her and also trying to get a hold of her. And you know that sense of fear. It was really, really difficult to hear that testimony. There was a word you used before. You said how the evidence was irrefutable. I couldn't agree more. From a legal point of view, I'm an attorney. I mean, this was a slam dunk case in my perspective. I said it day one of this trial. But when you hear the defense, you hear them putting forward the defenses, right? The idea here, there was no motive. He didn't know Rachel, that a witness allegedly saw this mysterious man in the woods. Look, he's entitled to a defense, and they put one on. What was your reaction to those defenses?
Well, my first reaction was that these folks that are defending the defendant probably have never walked the trail, because if they had, they would have known the position of the son, which the prosecutor, Allison Healy, she did such an excellent job. She brought out that the witness, when he turned around to see the man in the woods, he was actually looking into the sun. So the person that he saw in the woods would have had sunlight on his face, which would have made his features lighter. And he was also up on like a little knoll, so it would have made him taller. And so Allison brought that out after the fact. But, and then the other one was, remind me again what the other one was.
Well, there was no motive. He didn't know who she was. You know, there was no connection to her whatsoever. And by the way, from a legal point of view, you know, prosecutors don't have to prove that there is a motive, but they said there was no connection. He had no reason to do this.
But I mean, they showed a straight line from the tunnel to where the watch was on the trail to the shovel that they found to the house he was living in. So, do men need a motive to kill?
No.
Sometimes it's just in their hearts to do. I never believed that men were totally evil. But this is the first time that I really think that I have seen an evil person. It is just, it's frightening. And he lived here in Bel Air among us, even after her murder. And we have, what, 20 million people, illegal immigrants in the country now? And they say 1.4 million of them are criminals with detainers that they want to leave. So it just, if they don't have a motive and they don't need a motive, they just do it.
Let me ask you about that, Patty.
Because
let me ask you about that, really, because there's so much talk right now about what his punishment should be, right? I mean, it seems set in stone that he's probably going to be facing life in prison without the possibility of parole, no death penalty on the table. First, let me start there. If the death penalty was on the table, would you be advocating it? Would you be advocating for it in this case?
That's a hard question for me, only because I do think that if you commit a murder and you do it without reservation, and he did it premeditatedly, that that should be on the table, because he willingly, purposely took a life. And I think that if the death penalty was a standard across all the United States, that there would be less crime as far as murder, because people don't want to lose their life. People are going to do everything they can to fight to live. I know my daughter did. But a part of me also thinks that, you know, I'm a Christian, and this may sound terrible to some people, but there's a verse in James and it says, mercy rejoices against judgment. And for this man to have life in prison without the possibility of parole, he'll still have more than my daughter has. He'll have breath in his lungs. He'll have family. That's more than we have. So I'm conflicted. Part of me thinks that the death penalty should be in place, but in Maryland, it's not an option.
Well, there is this conversation right now, and look, his life will not be easy behind bars. There is this conversation about whether or not the most violent criminals in this country should be sent to another country, like El Salvador, where the prison system is much worse, to serve out their days. You think that would be a good punishment for him? You think that would be appropriate punishment for him?
I think that is probably not an option, just because he was tried here in Maryland, and it was an excellent judge in the case. She was very fair, and she did everything by the book. So I think whatever she ends up sentenced, this is poor English. I'm so emotional right now. I'm trying to control myself.
No, I completely understand.
I think whatever sentence that she gives will be appropriate for the crime. And if he does get life in prison without the possibility of parole, at least we'll know he's in America, and we'll know that he will stay behind bars.
Right.
If you take and send them to another country, all that has to do is be some kind of a upheaval in that country, and things can change.
That's fair. That's fair. I understand that. Before I let you go, Patty, 1 minute left. Just what would you like everyone to know about your daughter, Rachel, as we conclude this chapter in her story?
Rachel was a very loving person. She had compassion on everyone. She accepted people at face value. She was very authentic. And she's somebody that is going to be greatly missed. Everyone says about their loved ones how wonderful they are, but Rachel truly was a wonderful woman and very loved and missed by her family.
She was a beautiful person, Patty, with a beautiful family. Thank you so much for coming on. I am personally sending my best wishes and thoughts to you and the rest of the family. And again, what is a very difficult time, and appreciate you taking the time. And if there's anything, we here can do, you let us know, okay?
I will. Thank you so much for the invitation.
You got it.
I'm not sure why I have to keep saying this, but if you get it in your head to hire a hitman, don't. For so many reasons. One of which is that hired gun you're spilling your guts to more than likely is a cop, almost guaranteed. That's allegedly why a former Tennessee news anchor named Aaron Solomon is still alive and kicking tonight, and why his ex-wife Angie Solomon is sitting in jail. Police say that Angie had it in for Aaron for a long time, and that she told her quote-unquote hitman that her ex-husband's death would open up access to a trust fund for their daughter. But Angie was telling a whole other story to me on this show just a year ago, February, when she appeared live. Back then, she was accusing her ex-husband, Aaron, of a bizarre killing. The couple's own son, who died when his own SUV mysteriously rolled over him. Back in 2020, Angie said that Aaron had something to do with it. He was never charged with anything, but I know it is a lot to take in. Thankfully, reporter Audrey Franklin from our Nashville affiliate, WKRN, has the backstory.
According to Franklin police, Ashleigh Solomon offered an undercover officer money and her car as collateral, giving the officer a list of places Aaron might be in exchange for Aaron Solomon to, quote, disappear and to be put underground. Now Ashleigh is in jail on a $500,000 bond.
That's the question, is who is Aaron Solomon? Who is he really?
Ashleigh spoke with NewsNation 1 year ago, accusing her ex-husband of killing their son Grant in 2020. Grant's death was ruled an accident after he was run over by his own car. The Sumner County DA has said there was no criminal act in Grant's death.
From my personal experiences with my father and witnessing how he treated my brother, it is very reasonable for him to be responsible for the death of my brother.
3 years ago, the Solomons' daughter, Gracie, released a YouTube video accusing her father of sexually abusing her. Aaron Solomon has not been charged with a crime.
We've had a history of domestic violence, our family, the three of us, Grant, Gracie, and I.
News 2 found court documents from 2014, which state Ashleigh Solomon continues to make baseless allegations of abuse against Mr. Solomon, sexually and otherwise. The documents also say a temporary restraining order was placed on Ashleigh, and she was only allowed 6 hours per week to visit with her children. The documents cited Ashleigh's mental health issues several times.
The mental health issues that Angie Solomon's husband used against her when they were fighting in the custody battle, oddly, may now be her best defense in her murder for hire trial. And joining me now is someone who knows a lot about this case. Justin Shepard is a digital journalist who's been following the case from the beginning. You may know his handle, Just in the Nick of Crime. Justin, good to have you. I did not see this twist coming, my friend.
Me either. I was sent the article by about 8 different people, and I was just flabbergasted.
To say the least, the Daily Mail did an interview with Angelina. It's very damning. I mean, the things that they're putting it out now. They didn't put it out before. What's the backstory there?
Well, I haven't seen their particular interview yet, but, back then when she was interviewing with you, Nancy Grace, and everybody who would listen to her, when I was launching my now retired podcast, the second and third episodes were her and Gracie talking about Aaron Solomon, Grant's death, and the accusations that Gracie brought against her own father. And that's kind of the same story that every one of us heard. I would imagine that's what Daily Mail has as well.
They put out a statement, the newspaper, saying the Daily Mail can now reveal that Ashleigh Huffines Solomon, 55, said she wanted her ex, quote, gone, end quote, and that he, quote, didn't deserve to be on this earth, end quote, in an interview in 2023 that we are publishing for the first time. This is like murder for hire is usually a federal crime. So why isn't this one a federal crime?
So I do have a little bit of information that's not quite out there yet, but from what I understand, allegedly, this never took place on the internet. It was never used digitally to find this hitman. It was all done via like a word of mouth thing. So I don't think that we're going to be seeing federal charges. I think it's going to stick to Tennessee and the TBI.
And what about the fact that in Angie and Aaron's custody battle, Aaron accused his wife Angie of having, mental health issues? Is that something that she could now, harness and use in her defense against the murder for hire?
Well, I'm not an attorney, so I'll preface that, but I think that that's going to work out really well in her favor. But at the same time, when you look at like what the Daily Mail said, where she was basically saying what she told this hitman in that affidavit, that's 2 years almost of her. I mean, that's premeditation. That's planning it. That's thinking about it for a long time. So it shows an obsession for sure, maybe a long-term mental illness, but we'll have to see how that plays out. I think that right now that's going to be her best hope.
Man, oh man, what a saga. Like, talk about a Netflix series. Justin Shepard, always good to have you on. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
April 19th, 1995, 9:02 a.m. I'm sitting in my newsroom in Calgary, Canada, and we are all floored by the video that splashed across our screens. A 4,800-pound truck bomb has exploded right in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. It looked like a war zone right in the heartland of the United States of America, and it happened exactly 30 years ago this week. The devastation was almost instantaneous. A third of the building was reduced to rubble in seconds. 300 neighboring buildings were flattened or heavily damaged. 168 people killed, including 19 little kids. And more than 800 other people were hurt. Here's some of what our KFOR, NewsNation affiliate reporters, saw that day.
Well, Lee, just take a look for yourself. There's the Alfred Murray Federal Building behind me, and you can see just how badly damaged it is. It's about half of the building that is literally hanging, and at the bottom 2 floors are just stacked debris. Now, there are several other buildings right around to give you an idea of what kind of impact this had. Look at the Regency Towers there. Almost all the windows have been blown out of that hotel complex there. Several block area, it's complete devastation. Windows blown out of all the buildings. Some of these older brick buildings, the brick walls have collapsed. And they are still taking away dozens of casualties of this explosion.
Understandably, the first assumption was that a foreign terrorist had set off that bomb, but sadly, when the truth was later revealed, the soul of America was shattered. It was one of our own. A man who had even served our country, worn the uniform of the U.S. military, and he'd had help. Timothy McVeigh, along with Terry Nichols, were anti-government, and in their twisted view of our country, they wanted to start a war against leaders they considered to be tyrants. Both men were charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder and using a weapon of mass destruction. An accomplice named Michael Fortier was indicted on 4 counts, including conspiracy to transport stolen firearms. Reporter Mike Betcher led the coverage for NBC News, and he was one of only 3 journalists who spoke with Timothy McVeigh. I talked about that with Mike and about covering the story of a lifetime. Mike, it is hard to believe it's been 30 years. Does it feel like 30 years since the Oklahoma City bombing?
Some days it does. Some days like today, it feels like it was just yesterday. It's something I think about really every day because I live 10 blocks from the Oklahoma City National Memorial where that bombing took place. And in the basement of my home are cracks in the foundation from the bombing that occurred that day because it was like a small earthquake.
You're one of the first and only people, actually, so few people got a chance to speak with Timothy McVeigh, one of the bombers, the key bomber in this attack. Tell me about that. Tell me everything about your encounter with him.
Well, I knew his, I'm an Okie, grew up here, and I knew his attorney, Stephen Jones, who was from a town about 40 miles from where I grew up. And I was in charge of the investigation for NBC News into the Oklahoma City bombing. And I wanted to interview McVeigh. His attorney, Stephen Jones, set up an interview at the El Reno Federal Reformatory west of Oklahoma City, where he was being held awaiting trial in Denver. I remember walking in and sitting down in a kind of sanitized room, and he came in an orange jumpsuit. They had to unshackle him, and I had made a connection with him initially because he was a veteran of Desert Storm. I was an embedded reporter in 1991 in Desert Storm when the U.S. took back Kuwait from Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces. And so we talked about the war and all of that. I remember he was a lot taller than I thought he would be. And he was very, very polite. He seemed like, the boy next door that you'd meet in your neighborhood. But once I turned the conversation towards the federal government and his thoughts on that, his eyes turned steely cold. And he said, I don't want to talk about that. I don't like the U.S. government. I think he used the word tyranny. I wasn't allowed, although I did ask. He wouldn't answer questions about the bombing. But you could see in his eyes the hatred for the U.S. government. And I'll never forget that because this nice young man, very polite, suddenly turned stone cold. And I was witnessing, 2 different personalities in one sitting with Timothy McVeigh.
I have always wondered about this because when I heard back then, 30 years ago, as a young journalist, that he had made the comment that the children who were killed were, quote, collateral damage. I just wondered what it would have been like to be in the room. Did he seem at all divorced from the reality of 168 murders on his hands? Was it just did it just seem like a clinical function of his business?
I think the latter. I think you hit it on the head there, Ashleigh. I mean, he thought what he was doing was right. This bombing was a response to Waco, to the Branch Davidian compound issue that occurred 2 years before on April 19th, 1993. He wanted to start a revolution against the government of the United States. He thought that's what would happen if he did this bombing. That is my belief. And to him, it was a military operation. They planned it out. He had toured the federal building. And I am convinced he knew that there was a daycare center in there. 19 children died that day. And even though there have been denials that he knew anything about that, to him, the victims were collateral damage to what he saw as his final objective, which was the overthrow of the government of the United States of America.
Love that conversation with Mike Boettcher. Timothy McVeigh was found guilty on all counts and was executed in 2001. Terry Nichols, on the far right there, he was found guilty of conspiracy and manslaughter and sentenced to life in prison with no parole. And Michael Fortier, the guy with the long hair, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison and released in 2006 and is now in the witness relocation program. How about that? Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your screen. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.